Imagine a single speech so powerful it crossed oceans, silenced politicians, and brought a president to tears. What did Jasmine Crockett say that shook 2 continents, and why did it change the destiny of an entire nation forever? Stay with me, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Dear friends, what you're about to hear is more than just a story. It's a glimpse into a world where quiet courage reshapes destinies and dignity outshines power. These are the voices often missed by the headlines, but not here. If this kind of storytelling moves you, if it stays with you long after the screen fades, we invite you to subscribe and ring the bell. And before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. We read every word. Now let's begin. On a clear spring morning in Washington, D.C., a room filled with lawmakers, analysts, and journalists gathered under the high arches of Capitol Hill. Most expected another routine session, statements about foreign policy, debates over budget allocations, the usual theater of politics. But what unfolded was something no one could have predicted. As the room settled, Representative Jasmine Crockett stepped confidently to the podium, adjusting the microphone with a calm precision that masked the storm within her. Today's speech was supposed to follow the script: trade policies, international cooperation, carefully balanced words designed to avoid controversy. But Jasmine had torn that script apart the night before. She wasn't here to placate. She was here to reveal a truth the world had ignored for too long. She paused, letting the quiet settle like a hush before a storm. Today, she began, her voice steady but carrying a quiet fire, I will not speak about statistics or treaties. I will speak about dignity, and about a leader who, against all odds, has become a beacon not just for his nation, but for the world. The room stirred. Staffers looked up from their phones. Even seasoned journalists leaned in. Jasmine pressed a button, and behind her, the giant digital screen illuminated with the image of a man few in the room expected to see. President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, she said, her tone reverent. A leader who reminds us that true power lies not in dominance, but in service. The name echoed across the chamber. Some whispered, others frowned in confusion. Burkina Faso? To many, it was just another developing nation, lost in the complexities of global politics. But as Jasmine continued, her words pierced through decades of neglect and misconception. While others chase status and approval, she said, President Traoré has chosen a harder path, the path of self-reliance, humility, and relentless dedication to his people. When offered aid with strings attached, he refused. When pressured to follow foreign agendas, he resisted. He chose dignity over convenience. The silence was deafening. It was not the emptiness of disinterest. It was the weight of realization settling into every corner of the room. Jasmine's eyes locked onto the camera lens, speaking now not just to her colleagues, but to a global audience. And if the world truly believes in justice, she declared, it must start by listening to the voices it has too long ignored. What none of them knew was that thousands of miles away, in a quiet office in Ouagadougou, President Ibrahim Traoré was watching, unprepared for the words that were about to change everything. Thousands of miles away in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim Traoré was sitting in his modest office, reviewing development reports. His days were long, often consumed by the challenges of building a self-reliant nation while navigating pressures from powerful foreign interests. On this particular morning, as the ceiling fan whirred softly overhead, his chief of staff, Issa Diallo, entered with urgency in his step. Mr. President, Issa said, holding a tablet, you may want to see this. Traoré, accustomed to reports of droughts, infrastructure delays, or shifting diplomatic winds, took the device without much thought. But as the screen came alive, he saw not numbers or policies, but the image of Representative Jasmine Crockett speaking at the U.S. Capitol. At first, he thought it was a simple mention, perhaps a passing comment on African politics. But as he listened, his breath caught in his throat. Jasmine was not just mentioning Burkina Faso, she was honoring it. She was honoring him. While others chase status and approval, she had said, President Traoré has chosen a harder path, the path of self-reliance, humility, and relentless dedication to his people. For a moment, Traoré forgot the report stacked on his desk, the pressures of leadership that weighed on him every hour of the day. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing, heart pounding. Issa watched silently, understanding the gravity of what was happening. Jasmine's words were not carefully crafted diplomacy or empty praise. They were a bold declaration in a room where Africa's dignity was rarely championed without an agenda. She sees us, Traoré murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. He thought of the villages he had visited, the children who had greeted him with hope despite the poverty around them, the elders who had thanked him not for promises, but for the simple act of listening. And now someone across the ocean had listened too. As Jasmine continued her speech, acknowledging the sacrifices of Burkina Faso's people and the vision Traoré had embraced, a quiet emotion swept over the president. His reputation as a stoic, unshakable leader had never allowed for public displays of vulnerability. But now, behind closed doors, his eyes glistened. It wasn't just that someone had recognized his struggle, it was that finally the narrative of Africa rising on its own terms was being spoken aloud on the world's most powerful stage. And he knew this was not just a speech, it was a turning point. As the applause faded inside the Capitol chamber, Jasmine Crockett's words had already begun rippling far beyond Washington. News outlets picked up clips of her speech. Social media flared with debate. Some hailed her bravery, others criticized her for highlighting a leader outside traditional Western alliances. But the people who listened most closely were not in polished government offices or television studios. They were in the fields of Burkina Faso, in the crowded classrooms, the busy markets, the rural health clinics where progress wasn't theory, it was survival. In Ouagadougou, President Ibrahim Traoré stood at the window of his office, tablet still in hand, watching as the dusty streets pulsed with life. A convoy of schoolchildren passed by, uniforms faded but proudly worn. Vendors arranged piles of fresh mangoes, mechanics repaired aging motorbikes. These were the people Jasmine had spoken for, the ones whose daily struggles rarely made headlines, but whose resilience was the quiet backbone of the nation. Issa Diallo entered again, this time without urgency. "Mr. President," he said, "the phones have not stopped. Local radio is playing the speech on repeat. Journalists are requesting a statement." Traoré nodded without turning. He could hear the faint echo of Jasmine's voice in his mind. She had done more than offer praise. She had reframed a narrative centuries old, the idea that African leadership was reactive, dependent, or incapable of global influence. She had held up a mirror not just to the world, but to Burkina Faso itself. He finally spoke, his voice steady. "Draft a response, not just for the press, for the people. They need to know that what she said was not flattery, it was truth." Issa paused, then smiled. "And what should we say to Jasmine Crockett?" Traoré looked out at the people moving through the streets below. "Tell her she reminded us that dignity isn't something given, it's something recognized, and now the world is starting to recognize it too." That afternoon, Traoré gathered his cabinet. He wasn't interested in symbolic gestures. "We will launch a new initiative," he announced. A program called Bridges of Dignity, not foreign-funded, not conditional, built by our people, for our people. As the ministers nodded, the president added quietly, "Jasmine Crockett gave us a spark. Now we must build the fire." The launch of the Bridges of Dignity initiative was more than just a policy announcement. It was a quiet revolution. Within weeks, the streets of Ouagadougou buzzed not with protests or political rallies, but with the determined footsteps of citizens ready to take ownership of their future. Community leaders gathered under acacia trees, young entrepreneurs mapped out plans on recycled paper, and elders who had once been skeptical now offered their wisdom. The initiative focused on creating spaces where ordinary people could propose and lead projects, school renovations, local health programs, agricultural cooperatives, without waiting for foreign intervention or political permission. In the village of Kombisiri, just south of the capital, a small but symbolic project was already underway. A woman named Ibrahim Traoré, a former teacher turned community organizer, rallied volunteers to rebuild the local primary school. The old building had weathered years of neglect, its walls cracked and its roof patchy. But the spirit inside was unbroken. Using funds collected through the Bridges of Dignity program, along with local donations, Awa and her team secured materials, hired local carpenters, and, most importantly, brought the village together. Children painted bright murals of unity and hope along the fresh walls. One morning, as the sun cast golden light across the village square, President Ibrahim Traoré arrived unannounced. He had declined the usual media entourage. This was not for cameras, this was for the people. As he walked beside Awa, he listened, not as a head of state, but as a fellow citizen. She explained how the school's reopening wasn't just about education, it was about restoring pride and agency to the community. "For too long, we waited for outsiders to fix what we could mend ourselves," she said. "Now we move forward on our own terms." Traoré looked at the children gathered in the schoolyard, their eyes bright with anticipation. He thought of Jasmine Crockett's words, the call for leadership rooted in humility and purpose. This, he realized, was what she had seen in Burkina Faso. Not just resilience, but renewal. As he addressed the crowd, his voice carried more than authority. It carried gratitude and shared purpose. "Dignity," he said, "is not a policy. It is a daily act. And today each of you has reminded the world of that truth." Weeks after the Bridges of Dignity initiative began reshaping communities across Burkina Faso, the international spotlight returned to Ouagadougou. A delegation from the United Nations, accompanied by journalists and civil society leaders, had arrived to witness the transformation for themselves. Yet amid all the formal visits and televised moments, something much quieter and more powerful was taking root. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the rooftops of the capital, Ibrahim Traoré stood at the edge of a newly built community centre in a neighbourhood once overlooked by policymakers and foreign aid alike. Inside, children's laughter echoed against fresh-painted walls where vibrant murals depicted farmers, teachers, and health workers, not celebrities or politicians, but the true builders of the nation's future. Traoré paused, watching a young girl named Salimata, no older than 10, reading aloud from a notebook. The phrase she repeated wasn't from any textbook. It was a line inspired by Jasmine Crockett's speech. "Dignity is not given, it is lived." As Salimata's clear voice filled the room, Traoré felt the full weight of what had begun months ago. This movement was no longer about a speech or a single moment of recognition. It had become a living dialogue between people and leadership between one continent and another. Later that evening, during a televised roundtable discussion, Jasmine Crockett joined virtually from Washington. Her image flickered on the screen, framed by the U.S. Capitol in the background. "Ibrahim," she began softly, "what you and your people have built here transcends politics. You've shown the world that when leaders listen, entire nations can rise. But more than that, you've reminded us that the voices of ordinary people, the farmers, the students, the mothers, carry solutions we too often overlook." Traoré nodded, his usual formal demeanor softened by the emotion of the moment. "And you reminded us," he replied, "that dignity has no borders." As the dialogue concluded, the moderator asked both leaders what the future held. Jasmine smiled, eyes glistening. "The future," she said, "belongs to those who are brave enough to listen and bold enough to believe." Traoré turned to the local audience gathered in the room, their faces reflecting hope, resilience, and the unshakable belief that they were no longer waiting for change, they were living it. Across continents and cultures, the story of Ibrahim Traoré and Jasmine Crockett became more than just a political moment. It became a testament to the power of empathy, dignity, and authentic leadership. What began as a simple mention on Capitol Hill evolved into a global conversation about what it truly means to lead with purpose. Jasmine's bold speech not only highlighted Ibrahim Traoré's courage, but also challenged the world to rethink how leadership should serve the people, not dominate them. Traoré's humble yet powerful response ignited a national movement in Burkina Faso, transforming words into action and inspiring communities to reclaim their futures with pride and determination. Ordinary citizens, from farmers to schoolchildren, became part of a new narrative where dignity was not just an ideal, but a lived experience. Together they showed that even the smallest gestures, like a child's carving or a leader's heartfelt reply, could ripple across the globe and awaken a shared sense of humanity. In a time when politics often divides and power is frequently abused, this story reminded the world that real change starts with listening, with recognizing the worth in every individual, and with daring to lead not for applause, but for progress. The lesson is clear: leadership rooted in humility and service transcends borders. It teaches us that no matter where we come from, our voices matter and our actions can create waves of positive change. In your own life, whether you're leading a family, a classroom, a business, or simply your own journey, choose dignity, speak truth, empower others, and never underestimate the power of seeing and being seen. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think deeper about what leadership and dignity mean today, subscribe to this channel. Your support fuels the creation of more powerful, meaningful stories that deserve to be told. Let's keep this movement alive, together.